Hello and welcome to the WIHS Journal program. I'm Jack Pike, your host, and today the topic for discussion, along with my guest, who I'll introduce in a moment, is assisted suicide, or what some like to euphemistically call medical aid in dying. The attempts to pass this dangerous legislation in Connecticut goes back to 2013, and since that time the bills for it have died in committee, or at least for 1 year did not get brought up, as the proponents knew they had no chance of it going anywhere. As Connecticut State Director for the American Academy of Medical Ethics, I've been in the middle of this issue for a number of years and have worked with some wonderful people in a coalition to defeat it. One of those people, our coalition director, and my guest today is Jessica Rodgers, who is the coalition's director for the Patients' Rights Action Fund nationally. And we're using this time to talk about the subject of assisted suicide in the U.S., a little bit beyond our national border, but particularly in the New England area. So welcome, Jessica.
Thank you so much for having me, Jack.
Well, it's great that we were able to connect, and that's wonderful. So if you would, talk a little bit about your background and how you came to PRAF and what it's all about.
Absolutely. I've been working on this issue in some way or another since the early 2000s because I grew up in a state where this was legal, and I had the distinct privilege of being a caregiver for my mother who had a terminal illness. So I really saw firsthand how this kind of policy being in place erodes trust between patients and their physicians. And since that time, I've had the opportunity to study social work and specifically gerontology, and saw how uniquely these kinds of policies pose dangers to our elders and particularly to our disabled neighbors. So I've been with Patients' Rights Action Fund for almost 2 years now, working on this sort of legislation around the country and seeing how this fight really is taking shape, not just in New England, but nationally. And certainly we see what's happening in Connecticut mirrored in many other states where legislation does continue to come up, but remains unpopular across party lines.
Well, before we get to Connecticut, I think it's important for listeners in this part of the country to understand the current climate in the country, particularly New York State, as that bill, as far as I know, still has not been signed by the governor, and what Connecticut citizens can do, because we also have listeners in other states, including New York.
Absolutely. So let me give kind of a broad overview quickly, because a lot of people really aren't familiar with what this kind of policy puts into place. So broadly speaking, in the handful of states that have legalized, we see that you have to be over the age of 18 and you have to be diagnosed with a terminal condition, right? A doctor has to say that you have 6 months or less to live. And in practical application, that is with or without treatment. So if you have a treatable condition like diabetes that does require management, such as with insulin, and you do not manage it, whether you can't afford treatment or can't access treatment or simply choose not to treat it, your condition can be considered terminal and therefore eligible for assisted suicide.
Right.
So that's the very broad overview of how this works. In New York, there has been a push to legalize for a decade, similar to what we see in Connecticut. And this year, it received a vote, and we had a pretty slim majority that passed it in both chambers. As is consistent around the country, there was a strong bipartisan opposition. And you noted that it's currently awaiting action from the governor. She's had the ability to take action since June and hasn't really given an indication one way or another what she's going to do, only that she has a deadline to make a decision by the end of this year.
Yeah, and as you know, if she doesn't sign it, then it automatically becomes law, as I understand. Is that correct?
That is correct. However, the one public thing that she has said is that it is a serious issue. It's something that she is taking seriously, and that she will make a decision on it by the end of the year. So I do expect that she will either sign or veto. I don't think that it will just go into effect without signature.
I'm sure she's having, pressure on both sides to do it, but we're certainly hoping that she will veto it, because if it passes in New York, it's going to have its effects on Connecticut. And one of the concerns of even passing a bill like this, in Connecticut, for instance, is that once that foot is in the door, then attempts are quickly made to make changes and expand it. And we see that in so many other states, including Oregon, where you grew up. So speak to that a little bit, if you will.
Certainly, we see that it's currently allowed in 11 states and the District of Columbia, and 6 of those states this year introduced bills to expand their laws even further. That's pretty consistent. Once it's passed, as you said, once there's that foothold, they come back and they try to continue to open that door wider and wider and wider. And once it's part of the public consciousness, once it's already in law, it's a lot easier to come back later and to expand. And something for your listeners, particularly in Connecticut, but really anywhere throughout New England, to be aware of, is that the New York bill does not have a residency requirement, and there's no waiting period. Both of those things are pretty standard in other proposed legislation. So what it means in practice is that someone from Connecticut could drive across the border, they can have a telehealth visit with a New York doctor, and receive a prescription for lethal drugs that same day with a doctor that has no background with them and has never even seen them before.
And we saw that, and we're seeing that in Vermont. Same thing, where people can go across, and there was one person that was highlighted in, I believe, a news article of some sort, where they got people that don't even know them to sign that they're able to take their life. And it's amazing what's going on with that. If you're joining us late, I'm speaking with Jessica Rodgers, who is the Coalition's Director for the Patients' Rights Action Fund. And so another issue to talk about, and that is, and I think it's a real concern for some groups in Connecticut, which we have worked with, as you well know, the disability groups, is the targeting of people with disabilities and people of color.
Absolutely. As I noted, this is a policy that you can be eligible for even if your condition is treatable, but you just can't access treatment. So for people who have disabilities that have so consistently had to fight within the medical profession to be viewed as having an equal quality of life, to fight for the basic dignity that other patients without disabilities receive in the doctor's office, this is of particular concern because they know that they are too often and so often treated differently and viewed as having a life that other people simply wouldn't want to live. So when you couple that with a government policy that creates an incentive for insurance companies to deny care in favor of cheaper lethal drugs, when you have conditions, as many people with disabilities do, that are treatable but require consistent treatment and sometimes more expensive treatment, you're really creating a perfect storm that puts people with disabilities directly in the crosshairs, where they may very well end up backed into a corner feeling like this is not just a choice, but the only choice that they really have.
You have been listening to part one of my interview with Jessica Rodgers, who is the Coalition's Director for the Patients' Rights Action Fund, and we have been talking about the assisted suicide issue in Connecticut and nationally. We will air part 2 on Wednesday. For further information, you can contact WIHS at 860-346-1049. I'm Jack Pike for WIHS News and Information.